Everyone wants to build a brand, but few people actually know how. For most, a brand is a logo and a vague mission statement and little more. And can you really blame them? Creating a unique brand identity and articulating it so that others, ideally customers, understand what you stand for is a lot bigger undertaking than it seems. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table. In each episode, we sit down with some of the smartest and most innovative people who join us as guests on this show and share a ton of valuable business and life-enhancing insights. A big shout out to all of our esteemed listeners in over 140 countries around the world. Thank you for being here with us today. Today we're joined by Nigel Davies, a brand consultant who helps business owners untangle their brands so that they are more relevant, unique, and memorable. With over 25 years in the creative industry, Nigel was employed by leading design agencies, creating the first global standard for Ford Motor Company, before establishing his own agency. Not surprisingly, he has won multiple awards for brand transformation. In today's podcast, Nigel will be discussing the biggest mistakes that organizations make in the early stages of building a brand, the importance of brands creating an emotional connection with their customers, and some of the most challenging projects he's worked on, and how he's turned them into success stories for his clients. Establishing a strong brand is critical, but you also have to know what's going on in your industry. The apparel industry is complicated and constantly changing. To win, you not only have to know what's happening, you need to understand why and how it could potentially impact your business. When apparel industry executives want a sharp view of global supply chains, from factory to retail selling floor, they turn to Inside Fashion. Why should you read Inside Fashion, you might ask? In the words of one of our subscribers, Inside Fashion consistently provides an extremely comprehensive yet concise take on the apparel industry, simplifying key topics and making them accessible and understandable, while also highlighting what's next on the horizon. We couldn't have said it better. Find out how you and your team could benefit from Inside Fashion. You can learn more at InsideFashionLive.net. That's InsideFashionLive.net. I'll also leave a link in the show notes for this episode. Now let's sit down with Nigel and start building our next power brand. Nigel, I am absolutely thrilled to have you here with us on A Seat at the Table, talking about branding, a subject that I love to talk about. I love anything to do with branding and marketing and advertising and how you can build your product, right, in such a hyper-competitive market. And I think that a lot of the people that are listening to A Seat at the Table are at a point where they've got the manufacturing side down or they've got the design side down, so they've got the product. But now they need to take that and actually get it into a situation where they can start to drive sales for real.
Great to be here, and yeah, I'm looking forward to sort of diving into the subject of branding. For those out there, my name's Nigel. I'm an independent brand consultant based in London, the United Kingdom, but I do work kind of globally and across the world. And I have a long experience in helping brands do exactly that, make sure that they are relevant, unique and memorable. And more recently, I came up with a thing, and this might kind of help where to start, called Untangle Your Brand, because a lot of brand owners were coming to me in a bit of a mess. So I've launched this thing called Untangle Your Brand, which is purely aimed at helping people get out of that mess. And there's generally a number of reasons why people have got into a mess. And it's typically as they start to grow and as they start to push their brand further out there. So starting out in branding, if you're starting out in business, it's okay for it to be a little bit messy because you're going through your sort of trial phase. But as you need to go further, it has to be sorted out.
I think that's a really good point, that you don't have to get it right from day one, that you sort of get out there and then, as you're saying, you start to fine tune and tweak and see how things are going. Now, for people who are just getting started on sort of the brand building journey, what are some of the myths that you think need to be busted? When you're working with clients, what are some of the things that you see that you feel, again, right? This is just more myth. This is really the way it is. What are some of those things?
Well, I think the number one myth, and I think it's becoming more widely known than it is that a brand is not a logo. A logo is not a brand. A logo is just a representation of a business. It's very useful to have. It's a signal of who you are, a symbol of who you are. It's the name, it's what people refer to. But it's kind of like the smallest part of what a brand is, because a brand has so many other components that kind of create that totality. So what I always say to people, if you're trying to create a brand, the number one place to start is to think about your vision, because if you haven't got a clear vision for your business and your brand, you will not be able to create a brand. So I guess that's probably the first myth to bust, is don't start with the logo. Start with thinking about what your vision is, and then you'll get a lot further.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, that's sort of like the harder work that needs to be done, because it's obviously a lot easier to get a graphic designer and make an attractive logo or come up with a catchy name. But to be able to really think, like you're saying, in more abstract terms about what your vision is a little bit more challenging. Are there any things that people could do to get started on thinking about that? Are there certain questions that they might want to ask themselves?
Yeah, I mean, and the first question around vision, and you do this in stages, and the first question is where do you want to be in, let's say, 5 years? And if your answer is make some money, have a big office, then you need to ask that question, why does that matter? And you ask that question, why does this matter? 3 or 4 times, like an annoying child might, until you get to something that is more meaningful, probably more purposeful to you as an individual, but not as big as saying, this matters because I want to change the world, because you're not going to change the world. So you've got to get that right level of why it matters to you. And that shouldn't really be a challenging conversation with yourself. I do this with people, and we can generally get there in 5 minutes. And then they go, this is why it matters. So having your sense of purpose to create that vision is really important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I'm very glad that you clarified that, because sometimes people think of it as something really overwhelming and that they need to go on a week-long retreat and sort of meditate on it. And I think that by sort of putting it into perspective and saying you just need to ask yourself this question and then ask yourself why the answer you came up with is that, I think that's good.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the thing. Is that if you've reached the point of that you've either, given up corporate world, or you spent a lot of time investing in a product and you want to create a brand, you've not just got out of bed one morning and gone, I'm going to create, you've done a lot of work already. Why have you done that work? And if you can't answer that, then I'd be really, really surprised. You might not like the answer, but, it will be inside you. And I spend a lot of time with people, helping them understand that inner why. It's really important, because then, to your earlier point, it then forms the framework for everything else that you're going to do before you get to creating a logo.
I think that's really important. And I like the way you started, you said that as your inner why. I think that's a really good way to represent that, because you're right. People have, at least if they really think about it, some reason that's motivating them to do whatever it is that they're looking to do with their company or their product.
Yeah, exactly. So get over that hurdle. And again, I would say to people, definitely don't go off on retreats. Don't spend hours and hours thinking about this. Just sort of sit yourself down with a cup of tea. It's normally enough.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really excellent advice. Now, one of the things that you talk about is the importance of trying to create an emotional connection between your brand and customers. And when you hear you talk about that, or things I've read that you've written, it's easy to understand, but then it's less easy in a sense to think about how to apply it, particularly when you're talking about B2B products, right? So when you're talking about more upstream industrial kind of products, it's a little bit more, I would say it's less obvious. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
How might someone approach that who is in charge of a B2B product?
Yes, so this comes up a lot, saying, hey, we're B2B, we're not consumer. And I always sort of chat about branding, and we use the everyday examples, the famous ones like Apple and Nike, because people really kind of know those, and they go, yeah, but we're business to business. How's that relevant to me? And I think that the point is that all people are consumers. So even if you're a business person, you are still a consumer, and you are consuming a vast amount of marketing, messaging, advertising, all that stuff on a daily basis as a consumer. So when it comes to doing business to business, I would say don't think that differently. Think about how they are still human beings. Very specifically, and you can see my room now. If people are watching this on video, which they might do at some point, you'll see that I've got a whole wall of records behind me. And when I talk to, let's say, quite senior CEOs of big corporations and people that you might think are quite dry, corporate, boring, one of the first questions I ask them is, what is their favourite band or musical artist? And generally, they would say, depending on their age, they're probably going to say something like Pink Floyd or Queen or one of those sort of things. Or David Bowie, probably the most popular with that sort of sector. And instantly you get into a conversation about, well, why do you love David Bowie? And they can express why they love David Bowie in just a few words. You then ask them to do the same thing with their organisation, and they start stumbling. They can't. So if I was to ask you now, I'm going to ask you this. Who is your favourite band or musical artist?
Oh gosh, there's so many.
There's so many.
I guess
this is normally the first answer.
I would say, I certainly admire Elton John. Fantastic creativity, and but there's others. I think certain Michael Jackson was legendary, just from all aspects of creativity. There's a lot.
But straight away, so you're talking about Elton John. You said fantastic creativity. Give me two more words to describe Elton John as a musical artist. Fantastic, creative.
I would say high energy.
High energy.
Ooh, now you're challenging me.
Yeah, but the point being is that
questions in advance.
Yeah, exactly. But the point being is that, and I never do that one in advance, is that you didn't find it too hard to sort of describe your emotional connection to Elton John through high energy, his kind of creative, all that sort of side of things. And that's the same with most business-to-business owners. They find it quite easy when you point out something like that to explain why they like David Bowie. And then you say, right, what we have to do is be able to do that for your organisation. And the process is exactly the same. I ask them a whole series of questions. I go through things in a fairly set order. And first off is about, trying to, get the insight, make you relevant and all that sort of things. And it just works the same. But you've got to engage them in that right way in the first place.
Yeah,
so
I definitely see where you're going with that. I think that you're right. If you do think about something and you're forced to really, ask yourself a few times what you're thinking, why you're thinking, it forces you to articulate stuff that perhaps you sort of feel at a gut level or that at a gut level. But being forced to articulate it is different.
And that's exactly it, because when I define how you create a brand or what a brand is, it's about that emotional connection that the audience have with your product and service that makes them feel like they've made the right choice. So if you take, like most brands, there's we take Nike as being the obvious one, but I don't choose Nike, I choose Adidas. But I choose Adidas and I'm very happy with that. It's a great brand for me, cool, comfortable, all those sort of things about it, classic. And that feels right for me as a customer. Nike feels right for other people as a customer. So we need to make sure that we are sending out the signals that feel right for our customers, the people that we want to make an emotional connection with. And that is not everyone. So, the obvious thing, I'm sure you've talked about this on your podcast before, is that you have to understand the audience. That is understand the audience and what's going to trigger them. And then you'll be able to sort of learn from that and send out the right signals.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
I think that's a really important point, because too often people are trying to please everybody. And I get that. Everybody has to meet sales targets, and particularly in a tough environment, you're happy to get that business from any place you can. It becomes very difficult to discipline yourself to become focused, right? to say this is who our customer is, and we're really going to focus specifically on appealing to that customer. And if other people want to buy our product, we're not going to tell them no, right? But
Yeah.
our marketing, our branding, our advertising is really going to be focused towards that one customer, whereas a lot of times people want to water things down. I mean, what do you see happening around that?
In terms of, I think the important thing is that I think a lot. I know I work a lot with service-based businesses as well, and they tend to say that they don't have a particular audience, and that they don't have any competition and all those sort of things. But when you start to drill down into it, there is a type of person that their products and services are going to suit more than others. And I think people get afraid of just sort of saying, well, if I just say, for instance, this service is aimed at middle-aged white men, aged between 45 and 50 that like David Bowie, that's too much of a niche. And it stops other people being interested. But the reality is it doesn't. Because if you put yourself out there in the right way, other people will still be attracted. Yeah, because it's not about being as literal as only talking to those people. You're talking to everyone at the same time, really. But people are going to connect with some of those key messages that you put out there.
I think that's really important that you brought that up, because you see that and you can't help it. I mean, I have to market our products as well, and you find yourself falling into that trap, right? Of wanting to please everybody, not wanting to seem like you're only, out to please one. And you forget, like you're saying, that you lose focus, and then you mean nothing to anybody. You have no identity, right? You're the, you become the everything brand, which means you're the nothing brand, so to speak.
Exactly, and you're talking to no one about nothing, and no one's interested. So you at least, there's this thing about, I don't know if you're familiar with the Marmite. It's a sort of a spread that you put on toast. Some people love it,
Right.
Some people absolutely hate it. And just like Elton John, some people absolutely hate Elton John, but that's absolutely fine for Elton John because enough people love him, and so he's fine with that. You can't just be happy with everyone. But Marmite specifically plays on the fact that some people will dislike the brand because the fans love it even more, and that's a really important thing. Is that you are building this community of fans that are going to just love everything that you do, ignore the people that aren't interested.
Yeah, that's such a gutsy move. And when brands do it, it works, to be able to call out the stuff people don't like, right, about what you're doing, the things that perhaps the negative side, and actually spin that so that becomes a positive, or that creates, a tribe, right, of the people who
Yeah,
do love it. It takes a lot of backbone from a company to go forward with that. But as you're saying, it's very, very effective.
exactly.
So looking at all the brands you've worked with, I'm just curious, what was perhaps one of the most challenging brand assignments that you had, and how did you take what they had and turn it into a brand? It's easy when you have a brand that's got a lot going for it, like Apple or Tesla or even Nike, but not every brand comes with that kind of personality.
Yeah, so I got good. I think an interesting example. This is a business called DAPW, and doesn't sound very exciting when I say that. And they had a website, dapw.co.uk, and they actually were selling duvets and pillows and towels. Basically, the name stood for Duvet and Pillow Warehouse Company. And it's just really boring, and the image of it was just a warehouse full of cardboard boxes, and that's what you thought you were buying, really. It's just getting cardboard boxes shipped from a warehouse, and that's not really very exciting for a customer, because we don't want to think about the packaging and all that. So I worked with them for quite a while, and they actually employed me to begin with just to create a new name for them. And so we went through a whole process of understanding their audience, the business, the competition, all the things that I talk about, and came up with, I talk about a brand core. The thing is to get to this central, real why this really matters. And what we sort of landed on was that, this was all about creating moments of relaxation. And that was what was important. So whilst they were doing things for the bedroom, pillows, duvets, all those sort of things for the bathroom, candles, it was included, towels, dressing gowns. It was all about those moments of relaxation that were really important. And once we had that, we also kind of focused in on only doing things for the bedroom and the bathroom market rather than doing everything for the whole house. It became a lot clearer of how we could create the emotional connection. So we had that central thought, kind of creating these moments for the bathroom and the bedroom. And that then led to the name, which became Soak and Sleep. So Soak and Sleep, everything for the bedroom and the bathroom, enhancing your moments of relaxation. And all of a sudden, it shifted it from just being box shifting, boring warehouse, into something that was quite easy to say and spell, Soak and Sleep. And as a result, they actually became kind of more well known than many of the huge brands like John Lewis and IKEA. Within a year, they had better customer recall because of the name. And I think what was interesting and both challenging for me on that project is that once they'd come up with the name, they resisted changing it. They wouldn't change it because they were worried about SEO and stuff and all the work they'd put into DABW. So we did a sort of a soft visual identity reskin type thing, and they were happy. And then about another 6 months later, they came back and said, right, I think we'll try the name, see how that goes. And as I say, within a year, they were more famous than many of the bigger brands. So it made a big difference. They should have just made the jump in one go. I also think what's interesting about them is that now, since I've worked with them, they've updated their brand many times in terms of the visual identity. I'm not going to kind of make too many comments about that because of other people's work, but they've stuck with the name because that is the name that is the thing that has the connection with the customer. Soak and Sleep, enhancing moments of relaxation.
Wow, I love that. And it really is interesting to see how you took something that was, like you said, very basic, selling out of a warehouse. And just by creating that skin, as you say, it really now makes it seem like very upmarket, very elegant. It sounds like a premium brand as opposed to before, right? It sounded
Yeah.
more like a warehouse kind of a brand. And from what you're indicating, they really didn't change anything about the product, but
No.
they dressed it up in better clothing.
Yeah, without doubt. I mean, one thing that they tried to do was move away from offer-led retail, but I think they were too embedded in that. So they were sort of organisation business that always had sales. So customers were just used to having sales all the time. So I would say that for most businesses, that is not the best route to market because customers then expect it all the time. And it was really hard for them to move away from that. But they were able to kind of increase their amount of customers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Ideally, it would have been interesting to have tested the new name, but not change the old one, and just see if you had two parallel websites, right, or however they were selling, to see if you were able to, under the new name, basically sell the same thing without all the discounts and promotions.
Yeah, it would have been a good thing, but I think they tried it. I think there was success, but I think ultimately as a business they've slightly gone back into that. But if that works for them, if that model works for them, then that's the model that works. But
Right.
they have definitely managed to expand their reach by doing it, and that's probably just as important. I posed this question, the other day: how do you increase your, sales revenue? And there's lots of different ways, and one is increasing costs. The other is increasing the volume. One other is increasing the amount of customers. For them, they probably did it by increasing the amount of customers rather than increasing the sales price.
Right, right. Well, that's whatever gets your sales there is definitely better than not having that increase, and justifies the investment in creating that brand that did get the attention and make them stand out in a competitive market. Just one thing that I think that is interesting to bring up, especially talking to someone like yourself who really has such deep experience working in brands, that oftentimes I think people misunderstand, and that is, how long does it take when people launch a brand to when they start to really see see it gain traction? It's difficult because we're in a day and age with social media where you put something on one of those platforms and, within 5 minutes you start to see people coming by and giving you a like, or the platform telling you got views. So as we move into other things that are perhaps a bit more sophisticated, what should people be thinking about going into this? What should their expectations be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think actually on the projects that have been similar, you can start to see impact. You should see impact or change within a year, but certainly after 2 years. I think I had another client that I worked with, and they were a charity, and they'd set some kind of objectives, and they met them within 5 years. And it is a journey. Changing, rebranding something is a journey. I think, and they're for the sort of larger organisations. If you're maybe more small, independent, you may see some changes within the first 6 months. I think you'll get a bit of, and sometimes this is created by yourself, a bit of rush of excitement when you relaunch a brand, and then it goes back into the everyday mundanity of actions and activities. And I think the challenge is that just launching a brand and back to the start of this, just saying, hey, look at my new logo and I've got a funky new website, is pretty meaningless to a customer unless there's a significant change in the whole experience, back to the emotional connection that people are getting from it. And so just a relaunch can create a bit of noise instantly, but unless there's a significant change to the whole kind of experience, that dies away really quickly, and you're probably back to where you started.
Yeah, I think that's really good that you brought that up, because people are excited about something internally, and I think that there's oftentimes confusion about what's meaningful to promote internally to your team versus what's meaningful to promote externally to your customers. And I think you're right. It's exciting internally when a company either rebrands or brands to begin with, right? Redoes their website, redoes their storefront, or whatever it might be. But that's more of an internal thing. And as you're saying, you need to convey to your customers, okay, what are we doing that's actually going to make things better for you? Yeah. Those are, two different paths that people, I get the same things that you probably get when people say, we're so excited to launch our new website. And you're like, well.
Yeah, great. So what? Yeah, who cares? Yeah, I think there is a lot of that. And I think as brand and business owners, I'd be very mindful of changing things that are more for yourself without having that meaningful audience understanding and customer understanding that leads it, really. That's definitely part of the thing to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for companies listening to this who are at the early stages of starting to build a brand, thinking about it, or just getting a toe in the water, so to speak, deciding that, we really need to get this going. I know a lot of people who are listening to this are manufacturers who are thinking, we'd love to be able to take some of what we make and actually start selling direct to customers. E-commerce makes that's a little more accessible. Not that you have to just use e-commerce. What might be the first stage for these people, aside from thinking about what their brand might mean? How would they, get their foot on the pathway?
So I break the process into sort of three zones, really, three areas. The first is all about insight, and that's all about getting your the vision we talked about, the positioning, which is all about understanding how you align with your customers. And to do that, you need to understand a lot more about your audience, your brand, and your customers. And that's the first thing. And that insight work will make you more relevant. So I have a process called a brand donut, and they're the first two segments, vision and positioning. The next bit that I go on to, which is all about telling your story, which is all about making you more unique, where you focus much more on the offer, i.e. the things that you're selling. Some people call that the proposition. The values, things that you believe in, but they have to be values that are relevant to your audience. And then finally, the mission, which are the actions and activities that you can do, and what these things make you unique, but also help you achieve your vision. And that sort of like goes all the way around the donut. And then at the center, I put a bit like a donut, big, jammy, sticky core. What is it that, try and identify what glues all of those things together. So like the Soak and Sleep example was all about, the emotional, it was all about the enhancing moments of relaxation. What is it, just like you said about Elton John being about, creative and high energy, what is it about your brand that sits at the center of it? Well, once you've done that, you then go forward into the third and final bit, which is all about engaging. So insight, story, engage, and the engaging makes it memorable. And you do all the bits of the brand verbally. So the first bit, what's the name, what's the sort of tone of voice, what's the messaging. You look back at that framework I've just given you. You can then, once you've done the words, get onto the visual stuff, which is kind of the exciting bit where people normally start, but you do this bit last. Think about, well, now that I understand all this about my business, that what should the logo be? What should the colours be? What should the typeface be? What do we do about imagery? And then you can apply all that in a kind of consistent, coherent way that differentiates you from your competition or aligns you with your competition, depending on what you want to do. So that's the process. It's insight, tell your story, make it unique, and then engage memorably.
I think that's a really good framework that people can start to think about and start to see how they can utilize that, because it is a big leap to go from simply being a manufacturer or simply to be thinking about creating a product or launching a brand to actually get it going. So having that kind of a framework that you have outlined is really useful to sort of shape one's way to approach it. I mean, so oftentimes we find ourselves looking at a blank page, right? And thinking,
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin. Sometimes at least having a way to get on the path is really, just massively helpful. So
Yeah, thank you. And I suggest to people, like, the framework that I use is, I've got worksheets that are free, but it'll take you half an hour to fill in the basic of the donut to understand your vision, your positioning, your offer, your values, your mission, and your core. That's half an hour's worth of work. You could spend a year on it, but don't spend half an hour, 45 minutes if you're enjoying it. But you could probably, if you got all that down first, doesn't matter whether you do the brand by yourself or work with a professional, that will be a key to unlocking everything creatively that's going to come.
yeah, I think that's really good. I mean, I should get that sheet myself because, it's easy to talk about other people's things. It's a little bit more challenging when you have to sit and look at some of the things that you're working on yourself. So
Yeah.
now,
And I always say to people that this is fun. This is your business. This should be enjoyable. If you find a particular area challenging, don't worry, leave it blank, move on to the next. But if you're finding it challenging, you're probably going to have to dig a bit deeper into that area, because if a lot of people sometimes, let's say, like, they struggle on their offer, okay, but the offer is really, really important. If you get that wrong, well, you're not selling anything, so you'll never have a business. But whatever it is, you've got to dig deep into the reasons why you're finding it challenging, and then the answer will come. Everyone has the answers to these things. There's no business I've ever worked with where the business owner doesn't have the answer. They just don't know sometimes how to get it out.
yeah, I think that's really, you're right. And I think that, if you can, to be able to talk to someone like yourself, it's even better, right? Because yes, you have to look inside yourself for the answers because you know your product better than anybody. But sometimes having a third party point of view, someone on the outside who can look at something with perhaps a more objective view, someone who can step back a bit, who's willing to spend a little time getting to know what you're doing, but then come in who isn't so close to it that they can't see the forest from the trees. I imagine that would be tremendously beneficial.
Oh yeah, and that's how I work with people. And again, this needn't take loads and loads of times and lots of money. This is just about asking those right questions, then interpret them in an intelligent way so they become more meaningful when you start putting them out externally into visual identity and messaging and stuff. But yeah, it's a fun thing. I love it, as you can tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is, if for anyone who can afford to take somebody on to help them with that, it's massively useful. It is really tough sometimes to see your own product, or sometimes there's things that you overlook about it because you work with it every day and you think, oh, that's no big deal. And then someone on the outside will tell you. I mean, I find that when I ask our customers what they like about our products, I'm sometimes really amazed that things that I think are just not so special, people really like, and other things that I think are really good, people are just like, I don't know, I guess other people like it, but not me. I'm like, what do you mean? This is the good things that we do, and yet they don't like it. And the thing we think is just so no big deal, ordinary people like, yeah, that's what I really find valuable.
Yeah.
So it's hard to see your own thing sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and that's the insight phase. Keep talking to customers. I know we're all bad at it when we do our own things, but get those customer insights constantly. If you're, in business, you probably should be putting something out there every 6 months to make sure you're still selling the right thing to the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nigel, you've shared so many interesting things. Where can people find you? I'm sure a lot of people would like to be able to connect with you, to be able to perhaps ask their own questions and possibly work with you.
Yeah, well, thanks, and yeah, it's been great speaking with you as well. I've enjoyed this. But the best place to find me is untangleyourbrand.com. So untangleyourbrand.com. Sure, we could probably put some links in some show notes or something.
Absolutely.
And then from that you'll find me on LinkedIn it's the only place that I do sort of social stuff. So yeah, untangleyourbrand.com, where there's free worksheets. There's also a free video course, so 6 15-minute videos you can watch that teach you everything you need to know about branding. That's all there. Sign up for that. But yeah, I would say to everyone, download that worksheet, get started, and then yes, there's obviously ways that I can help you further.
Oh, well, that's really great. And I'm definitely going to put that website in the show notes if you didn't get it already, untangleyourbrand.com. But I'll have it in the show notes just so that people will have an easier time clicking on that link and hopefully being able to head over to your website, take advantage of a lot of the free information that you have there to educate people. And then, if they're able to work with you, well, aren't they lucky? So, Nigel, well, thank you so much for joining us here on A Seat at the Table. It has been fabulous having you on the show.
Thank you. Very much enjoyed it. And yeah, good luck with everyone. And yeah, keep on branding.
Thank you.